spider was on the ground, pacing me, waiting for its medium lasers to recharge so it could hit me again in the rear armor. It thought I was ignoring it. I started the Marauder's torso rotating on its ring as if I were tracking the Buccaneer. The PPCs recharged. I spread the Marauder's arms wide, the left arm pointing back dead at the spider. I fired. The heavy PPC blew straight through the 30-ton mech's chest and out the back. The mech sat down hard, like a petulant baby, then fell over. The most difficult part of writing this Marauder video script has been deciding what to include. From the plethora of materials, fiction, and art assets, it's impossible to include everything that I want in a 15 to 26 minute video. I'm sure to have been forced to leave something out that you cherish from one of your most beloved battlemechs in this IP, and for that, I can only say that you're probably correct and I made a horrible mistake by not including it. For many Americans who first entered the BattleTech universe through the novels they bought from the mall bookstore in the early 90s, it's possible that the Marauder was the first battlemech you saw in art form. The 1992 reprint of Decision at Thunder Rift, written by William H. Keith Jr., featured a wonderful, imposing ground-up view of the Marauder looking as menacing as the mech in the novel. The artist, Bruce Jensen, did a great job conveying the size and power of what the new reader would discover was a mech that had earned its name through capabilities and deeds. Whether it's through the novels, the boxed BattleTech sets, or even the video games, the Marauder has been a presence that cannot be ignored. It's 75 tons of PPC-wielding madness that dominates early in the timeline, and later on, with the help of some really effective upgrades, stays competitive against much newer designs. A fascination born of sick horror gripped him, held him frozen there at the mouth of the alley. Almost in slow motion, the armored monster straightened slightly and then brought its right arm as though pointing. Recessed in the swollen bulk of the forearm were a pair of the mech's primary weapons, a medium laser and the massive bore of a particle cannon. The laser flashed blue-white, a brilliant pulse that shrieked and ionized the air in its wake. The beam struck the APC, setting aflame the guardsman who had been clinging to its hull. Grayson squeezed his eyes shut against the blinding light, but still saw the after-image of a guard's officer writhing in the carrier's hatch as the steel around him blossomed into a fireball. A chain of staccato cracks carried above the roar of flame and crumbling buildings. The Marauder's autocannon, a tree-sized barrel mounted across the mech's left shoulder, was spewing 120mm high-explosive destruction in 3-round bursts that shattered the street behind the burning carrier and transformed clumps of running green uniforms into bloodied shreds of rag. A 27th century design, the Marauder was intended to be a 75-ton monster of a mech that could stand on its own as a frontline battlemech, but also act as fire support when needed. General Motors, or General Mechanics depending upon which source you use, intended for the Marauder to be the first of many mech designs that would revolutionize combat and conveniently re-secure the company's place as a dominant weapons producer in a crowded marketplace. Their production lines were located within the Federated Suns and were already producing everything from light vehicles to dropships. If any company could pull off the feat of a successful battlemech design, it was GM. Now, it can be a bit tricky talking about the origin of the Marauder. This is due to the fact that the SLDF Royal units became a thing in the IP long after most people got to know the Marauder from the iconic books like the 3025 Technical Readout. At the risk of making this a Royal variant video, I have a little bit of a problem with their existence because it creates the impression that 1, clan tech advances weren't so significant after all, and 2, it fostered the impression that all the tech that exists already existed and it's just a matter of rediscovering what the glorious Star League knew. To me, that sounds uncomfortably close to how things are run in a certain grim-dark sci-fi universe that will go unnamed. That being said, if you love the Royal units, go wild, you have my blessing. But to me, the first Marauder does not have ferrofibrous armor or ERPPCs. Yes, the Marauder 1R and 2R exist. I'm not saying they don't exist. I just think our time is better spent elsewhere. To me, and most others I presume, because what point is there to being a YouTuber if you can't assume that everybody agrees with you, our first Marauder is the MAD 3R. Sometimes referenced as the Succession Wars Marauder, it's the 3025 TRO variant and the one featured in more than a few stories and novels set during that era. Built around a custom and very unique GM Marauder steel chassis, The designers clearly went out of their way to make sure that when you saw a Marauder on the battlefield, there was no misidentification. From its backwards knee joint, egg-like torso, and sleek arms, the Marauder had a downright alien appearance in comparison to its contemporaries like the Warhammer and Rifleman. GM was determined to make an impression, and clearly they went all in. The Vlar 300 fusion engine allowed the Marauder to plod forward at 64.8 km per hour, which was typical for heavy mechs at the time. The 3R lacked jump jets, but a frog can dream. Someday. 16 double heat sinks and 11.5 tons of armor round out the Marauder 3R's core construction. As far as weaponry goes, most people who have encountered a Marauder will definitely remember the two arm-mounted Magna Hellstar particle projection cannons, and even the GM Whirlwind AC-5 autocannon mounted in the right torso, because they are hard to forget for different reasons. The PPCs ruled the battlefields of the early Succession Wars, and that AC-5 turret really does go a long way to making the mech look menacing. It's just a shame the autocannon wasn't practically more menacing, but I digress. For up-close discussions, a pair of Magna Mark II medium lasers can take advantage of holes bored by the PPCs earlier in the fight. The downside, if there was one for the Marauder, was the same issue that so many of the 3025 battlemechs faced. That menacing, detracting issue was their heat generation. Having two PPCs is grand, but if firing both at the same time results in a +4 on the heat scale, it can only be done sparingly and not turn after turn. +4 is that sweet spot between victory and disaster, but it requires holding off on the autocannon and medium lasers. A full alpha strike is pretty much out of the question in all but the most dire of circumstances, as it would put the mech well into the red at 11+ heat. That would impact your speed by -2 and your next 2-hit roll by +1, so hopefully it's worth it, or you really need to settle things this turn. The Marauder 3R will always be one of my favorites, as it's a great mech to teach someone how to manage heat, and it can pack quite a punch when you do feel it's time to unleash both PPCs at a target. For the time period it was produced, it's a very solid battlemech. Desperate, his head reeling in pain and loss of blood, Grayson triggered both PPCs under the enemy heavy's upraised arm. Lightning flared and crashed, a fireball rolled up from the Warhammer's shattered chest, and the armored giant staggered backward, collapsing in a blazing, twisted tangle of battlemech junk. Grayson whooped victory through the scalding air that seared his lungs, but the triumph died in his throat as he glanced at the shattered main gate. Another battlemech force with Eadeh markings, a full company at least, was pouring through and into the courtyard, each machine fresh, undamaged, and combat ready. Following its introduction, the Marauder became a favorite heavy battlemech for Mechwarriors as well as their commanders, thanks to its advanced electronics package that aided in battlefield command and control. Marauders were sold as quickly as they could be produced, and demand from parties across the Inner Sphere remained consistently high. However, even with brisk sales, the Marauder remained somewhat rare on the battlefields of the Succession Wars due to its use as a frontline battlemech. The attrition rate for any battlemech in those dark days saw many Marauders rendered into scrap and salvaged for parts. Unsurprisingly, the Marauder did receive many field refits over the years and dozens of official variants. We're definitely not going to be able to cover them all, but I think I've picked some that I've had success with, find interesting, or at least have some fun lore behind them. The first variant we're going to tackle comes to us from House Davion Space. The Marauder 3D's concept sought to do away with the AC-5 and its dependence upon ammunition. Creating a fully energy-kitted design would allow the Marauder to operate for long periods of time, far from support lines if necessary. The downside, unfortunately, is a very toasty one. While the swap from AC-5 to large laser was doable, it only brought enough weight with it for 4 additional heat sinks. Since 4 is less than 8, you're probably going to see the problem. While the heat sinks did make it possible to fire both PPCs without overheating, firing both of them and the large laser left the mech at +8 heat. It wasn't the end of the world, but it still required a good amount of heat management. On the bright side, firing both PPCs and just one of the medium lasers will only leave you at +3 in the red, so you could just go wild with that for a turn and not feel any consequences until the next, where you could just keep firing both PPCs and stay at +3 each turn. Overall, the Marauder 3D is a neat idea even if you can't frequently go all in Alpha Strike. The minimum range on the PPCs makes the large laser more valuable should a target get in close and stick to you. Though it doesn't often get brought up, I like what the 3D has to offer for the Succession Wars variants. It packs a punch and will leave a mark so long as you don't miss the autocannon too much. Over in the Free Worlds League, the Succession Wars were straining supply chains to the point of collapse by the later half of the 2800s. Desperately short on particle projection cannons, the Marauder 3R production lines needed a new set of primary weapons. The answer was found, for better or worse, in the Marauder 3M. First stepping from the production lines in 2873, it was a controversial shift in the mech's firepower. Designers scrambled for the best possible solution and used what was available. A pair of large lasers were chosen to replace the PPCs in each arm. Though the twin large lasers were 20% less damaging than the PPCs and had a shorter effective range, at least they did run a little cooler. The mech's 20 standard heatsinks could handle firing both the large lasers, autocannon, and one of the two medium lasers on the mech without crossing over into the red. Adding in the second medium laser for the full Alpha Strike experience only puts the Marauder 3M at +3, which is fine in moderation. In fact, because you can regularly mix in those backup weapons, it more than makes up for the loss in damage from the removed PPCs so long as you're in range with those medium lasers. The final result was a Marauder that was missing some of its razzle-dazzle without the PPCs, but more than made up for it with a crushing short to mid-range brawling capability. That difference is why I really like the 3M and have included it in our list today. Through flowing clouds of smoke, Kevin saw the Taurian Jägermech farther down the long road, its autocannons now tracking him. He sneered. In no universe would a Jägermech challenge a Marauder. He advanced slowly and deliberately, alternating PPC fire to keep his heat tolerable. The Jägermech backed away, its ridiculous light autocannons belching fire that could do nothing more than scar his paint. It must have expended all the ammo for its larger guns, a problem Kevin did not have. His own autocannon maintained a steady stream of slugs that tore through the Jaeger's light armor with gusto. Then one of his PPCs blew through the Jägermech's knee. The leg sagged, thigh collapsing into shin, and it fell onto its side. An explosion briefly lifted the mech up, and then it rolled onto its back and lay still. Kevin advanced until he stood over it and planted one clawed foot firmly and disdainfully in its cockpit. When the Federated Commonwealth's 10th Flyron Guards smashed into the Jade Falcons on Twycross in September of 3050, Lieutenant General Milstein was pleased to discover the Falcons had not deployed frontline Omnimechs, but instead conventional inner-sphere designs. What he didn't realize until they were wrapped up in the thick of the fighting was that those mechs were upgraded with clan technology. Confidence in their numerical advantage was dashed as the battle ground into a bloody stalemate, with the inexperienced Jade Falcons making up for their disadvantages with mechs that ran cooler and could hit harder than their foes. One of those Falcon battlemechs spotted was a clan refit of the Marauder, piloted by a star commander named Hellcap, designated the Marauder 3R-C. It wasn't a full clan-tech version of the mech, but it did swap out key weapon systems and added traditional heatsinks to reach 19. The PPCs from the 3R were swapped out for a pair of clan-tech large pulse lasers, which did as much damage as the weapons they replaced, but at longer range and huge improvement in accuracy. Backing up the large pulse lasers, an Ultra AC-5 reached out to 21 hexes and doubled the possible damage from the original AC-5 in double firing mode. Finally, the two medium lasers from the original are shockingly left as they were. They don't even get the ER treatment. So sad. The Marauder 3RC is a great 3050 refit. If you're able to pick one up in your travels across the inner sphere, nab it. Now, as popular as it was, it's not surprising that the Marauder was the recipient of multiple upgrades following the discovery of the Helm memory core and its resulting leap forward in technology. By the 3040s, multiple manufacturers were producing their own variants of the Marauder. This includes the Taurian Concordat, who just kept making the 3R as updated tech was in short supply out in the periphery. The Draconis Combine snapped up their own factory when they took Quentin during the War of 3039, and it seemed everyone had at least one source of the iconic battlemech. The Marauder 5D is a good example of the sort of variants that were being produced in the decade before the clans invaded. The addition of an XL engine traded critical locations for weight, which was invested in additional armor, jump jets, and fancy new weaponry. The 5D's ability to leap was popular with Mechwarriors who appreciated the improved agility, and the 16 double heatsinks put the originals to shame. Of course, they did have their work cut out for them with the installation of 2 ERPPCs, a large pulse laser, 2 medium pulse lasers, and a streak SRM-2. Even with 32 heat dissipated each turn, an Alpha Strike was out of the question. Firing everything left the mech at plus 18 heat, which brings it to modifiers to firing, movement, ammo explosions, and risks of shutdown of the mech. So use those pulse lasers sparingly, or when a fast-moving target is close and you need the accuracy boost. In general, I'm not a huge fan of the Marauder 5D outside of the addition of jump jets. Extending the range of the primary weapons with ERPPCs was nice, but the increase in heat is substantial and it can feel as though you're not getting the most out of the design when forced to leave that large pulse laser out of the mix each turn. The addition of the XL engine makes the mech more vulnerable, and I'm not convinced that it's worth it with what the 5D has equipped. For our next Marauder variant, we need to travel to the scenic Capellan Confederation, which took up the challenge of constructing their very first Marauder assembly line. Of course, it wasn't enough to just produce an existing variant. This Marauder had to be a unique design. Ceres Metals was tapped to design and build what would be known as the Marauder 5L at their lines on Warlock and Capella. Ceres had experience working with newer technology, and their production lines were quickly adapted. The Marauder 5L was from all Capellan sources, so that resulted in a unique look that defied previous versions of the mech. The Ceres Marauder light steel frame encased a Rawlings 300 fusion engine. Wrapped in triple-strength myomer, this energy weapon-heavy design would have plenty of opportunity to move swiftly and hit very hard. Of course, all that myomer needed some protection, so Ceres added 14 tons of their in-house heavy stealth armor. This provided 224 points of protection and allowed the mech to significantly reduce its battlefield signature and avoid easy detection. Instead of PPCs, the right and left arms were given an ER large laser and an ER medium laser. There was an initial attempt to leave an ER PPC in one arm, but there were some technical issues involving the targeting and tracking system, which were solved by avoiding the issue entirely and putting one ER PPC in the right torso instead. Finally, a Guardian ECM suite was installed to further aid in keeping the mech off of enemy scanners until the last possible moment. The 18 double heat sinks on the 5L definitely got a workout, though you're going to want some of that excess heat in situations where that triple strength myomer can come into play. Firing both ER large lasers and the ER PPC will leave you at plus 3 heat, which is not bad at all. The ER mediums give you some fine tuning to hit your heat benchmarks for that triple strength myomer. Then you're really off to the races. The Marauder 5L is a curious design and definitely one that requires some skill and know-how to properly take advantage of the triple strength myomer and the stealth armor. The first production runs tended to be grouped together in what were called shadow lances in frontline Capellan units. The Capellans had a monopoly on stealth armor for a time and took advantage of it before eventually the Davions got their hands on it and spread the info far and wide. It's a unique design, and if used well, the Marauder 5L could tear up a battlefield. Based upon available accounts, it performed well and even was the basis for a 6L variant in 3070 that pulled the ER large lasers and ER PPC in favor of a couple of plasma rifles and a standard PPC. Not too shabby if you know someone who's into plasma rifles. Oh, it's me! I'm anyone! Anyway, our last official variant for today's video is the Marauder 7S, which debuted in 3086. It benefited from an XL engine, 15 double heat sinks, ferrofibrous armor which allowed for 2 ER PPCs to be fired consistently, along with a Gauss rifle located in the right torso, along with 2 tons of ammunition stored in the center torso. Rounding out the build, a pair of medium X pulse lasers provided some up-close accuracy should light mechs or battle armor wander too close. The XL engine is a bit iffy for me, but clearly some found the Gauss rifle's 15 damage worth the risk. The 10, 10, and 15 damage each turn was undoubtedly attractive to its designers. The primary reason why I picked the 7S among the many different options for the Marauder out there is that there's a famous refit for this variant that I want to touch upon. As one of the IlClan era's more notorious and somewhat mysterious mercenaries, Abdun Recall used his modified Marauder 7S, known as the Akaryoshi, to great effect against the Novacats, Clan Wolf, and even the Draconis Combine, which is interesting as Recall had much of his attention tied up with settling scores against old family enemies. Though much of his personal history is hazy, we know a lot about Recall's mech, so let's check it out. The most commonly seen configuration of his 7S featured a GM300XL engine, ballistic reinforced armor, and a supercharger that allowed it to run at up to 86 km per hour in short bursts. The Gauss rifle in the torso was removed in favor of a ClanTech Ultra AC-10. Meanwhile, in the arms, there were 2 Magna Flare Star snub-nosed PPCs that were modified with capacitors to boost their damage. Finally, again split between the arms, were a pair of Clan ER medium lasers. The combination of snub-nosed PPC and capacitors made the mech incredibly dangerous at short range, and with the 14 double heatsinks, the Akaryoshi could consistently fire both for a while before the heat issues began to get serious. An Alpha Strike left the mech at 18 heat, which would be a considerable issue, but if you absolutely needed to finish off an opponent, that would be a possible 64 damage if the capacitors were charged and the UAC-10 double fired. Abdun Recall and his Marauder have built such a reputation for ferocity that it's said the DCMS officers significantly bolster their personal security and defensive units if there's even a hint of Recall's presence in the region. Too many leaders, be they Novacat, DCMS, or Clan Wolf, have met their end due to the red and black painted Akaryoshi. Now, don't think you're going to escape without a custom Mechfrog variant. I think I've cooked up something unique that will tempt you away from the dozens of official variants out there, but let's take a look. The story behind it is simple. A remnant force of Jade Falcons fleeing the chaos of the post-Malvina universe stumbled upon a functioning Marauder production line. Upgrading what they could, the mixed tech MAD MF is the result. Through the use of Inner Sphere Endosteel and a light fusion engine, enough weight is saved to add 19 Clan double heatsinks and 14.5 tons of standard armor. The loadout is based around a couple of tried and true Clan large pulse lasers split between the left and right arms. They are joined by a couple of Clan medium pulse lasers out of tradition and to keep a hint of the original Marauder loadout. In the right torso, a plasma rifle provides worthy backup in the mid and short range, as well as providing a significant threat to laser boats and infantry alike. In the left torso, a Clan anti-missile system can prolong the mech's life, and finally, in the head, a heavy Clan flamer can reach out and incinerate anyone who wanders near. The 19 double heatsinks can handle firing most of the weapons each turn without issue, and while the mech lacks a heavy hitter weapons option, the accuracy and consistency of the large pulse lasers more than make up for it. I think the Marauder MF provides a toasty frontline mid and short range brawler option that would be pretty tough to beat. I've been waiting on the Marauder video for a while because I wanted to make sure that I did it right. It's one of those battlemechs that has a personal connection with fans of BattleTech, and that's important to me. Be it through novels, tabletop, or video games, we all have a Marauder story to share, and that's really a great thing. If you want to share your story, feel free to add it to the video comments and we'll keep the conversation going. Grayson's Marauders set off alone against the Merrick army. Behind him, the battlemechs under his command stirred or stood still as the pilots watched, dazed by mind-numbing battle exhaustion. It was not mutiny so much it was complete breakdown of men and women pushed too hard and too far. The second mech began to move. McCall's shattered riflemen started forward, wires and twisted strands of Myomer sheathing still dangling from the gaping hole where one of its twin-cannoned arms had been mounted. In the next instant, Delmar Clay's battled Wolverine was moving out, with Lowry close behind him. Then the entire band of 12 mechs was moving forward, a ragged, battered line to meet the enemy at the Vermilion River. So why do we love the Marauder? It has a unique look that sets it apart from its peers, a backstory that connects it to dozens of points in the BattleTech universe, and most of the variants hit hard and make an impression. You cannot ignore a Marauder on the battlefield, as it will make its presence known. So what's your favorite Marauder variant? What's your Marauder story? Let me know in the comments. Thank you everyone for coming by today to talk BattleTech. If you had a good time and want to see more, hitting that like and subscribe button is a free way to let YouTube know that this is quality content. Channel members and Ko-Fi crew, you're awesome, and I appreciate that you've gone the extra step and put faith in my work. I'll keep plugging away at it as the nonsense must flow. Until we meet again, take care and go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.